All right, 2022, Palmer. Gunnar Stockton. People are excited about him coming into the fold as a five-star quarterback, obviously.
No, and that's completely understandable. Like I said, Brock Vandegrift and his Princeton Avenue team lost one game this season, and it was to the hands of Gunnar Stockton in Raven County. That game was nationally televised on ESPN. Those two quarterbacks went head-to-head, and it was an exciting matchup. Gunnar was committed to South Carolina at the time, ends up decommitting after the new year after Will Muschamp was fired. And actually today, Muschamp was announced that he's now on staff here at Georgia in an off-field position. So that's some news that came out of the Georgia signing day press conference. But Stockton, ends up decommitting from South Carolina. He had a great relationship there with offensive coordinator Mike Bobo, who was formerly at Georgia. Bobo ends up going to Auburn, and there's a lot of hype around Stockton to Auburn. He ends up committing to Georgia last Thursday. I guess the narrative that you hear with Georgia fans right now is there's two sides of this. There's either one, you're bringing in tons and tons of talent and you're really happy about that, or two, you're bringing in back-to-back five-star quarterbacks and people are very concerned that it's going to be another Jake Fromm and Justin Fields situation. And to the latter, I would say you're probably not looking at that same situation, because assuming that JT Daniels stays healthy this year, he's going to be Georgia's starting quarterback. Brock Vandegrift will not have a full season of starting experience under his belt, assuming that Daniels stays healthy. And therefore, after Daniels leaves, you'll be looking at Vandegrift and Stockton as two guys that would be going into their first year as a starter. That wasn't the case with Fields and Fromm, as Fields came in with Fromm having a year advantage on him. I think regardless of how you look at it, and I know there's plenty of people that think you shouldn't bring in five-star quarterbacks back-to-back. You should stagger them. You should put a class in between. That's kind of been Dabo Swinney's model over at Clemson, and it's worked out for them. You look at Gunnar Stockton, and he's a guy that wants to be at Georgia. He's competitive. He knows that Brock Vandegrift is there. Brock has signed. Brock is already on campus, and that wasn't a deterrent at all. Gunnar still commits to Georgia. He's competed with Brock head-to-head on the field, and I think he would be the first to tell you that he's probably excited to come in here and compete with him in Athens. You look at his high school stats, he's averaging over 3,000 yards passing, over 1,000 yards rushing, over 60 total touchdowns a season. And that's in 3 years of high school starting experience. He was the Max Preps Freshman of the Year 3 years ago. He's put up huge numbers these past two seasons, and I'm really excited to see what he can do in this senior year, with some hype around him as the number one dual threat quarterback in the country.
I just think when you can take a five-star quarterback, you take him. You don't say, we're going to pass this year and we'll wait till next year. Well, next year may not come, because next year there's only a couple of these guys. There's only about 45 stars, period, all positions put together. So there's a couple quarterbacks that are at that level. And if you're going to intentionally pass on one of those guys just because you don't want two in the same quarterback room, or two back-to-back classes, and then you're going to wait for the next year, well, the next year you may not get one of the five-star quarterbacks. So my theory is a pretty simple one. You stack talent and you let it compete, or if somebody chooses based on the excellence of one of them, and hey, one of them excels, takes the starting job as one of the best quarterbacks in the country, and then one of them takes off, you still have one of the best quarterbacks in the country. As opposed to you get one of those guys and maybe he's a bust or he gets injured and you don't have a five-star quarterback.
Exactly. And when, Gunnar Stockton is a kid that's probably an hour and a half down the road from Athens. He grew up a Georgia fan. This is a kid that you can't let get out of your backyard, especially when you look at the teams that were recruiting him so heavily. He was committed to South Carolina. He's being recruited heavily by Auburn and Mike Bobo. Those are two teams that Georgia plays year in and year out, two of Georgia's biggest rivals. And if you let him slip and say Brock Vandegrift isn't what Georgia fans expect him to be, and Gunnar is, well, then Gunnar's doing that, damage to you on a year in and year out basis.
Absolutely. Got Palmer Toms on the line from Dogs 247 Sports, so you know the brand at 247 Sports. So that's all you need to know. You head on over there to check out Palmer and the rest of the staff and what they provide covering Georgia football. Again, it's dogs247.com. And Palmer joins us on a regular basis to break down the Dogs number 3 recruiting class. That should sound familiar. That's 5 straight. If it holds, which it basically should, or whether it's 3rd or 4th, what's it matter? Georgia's bringing in another haul of talent.